Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a case that absolutely shocked the nation and honestly forever changed a quiet college town. Back in November 2022, 4 University of Idaho students were brutally murdered in their off-campus home in Moscow, Idaho. What unfolded after that was just a massive, multi-agency manhunt, and it ultimately hinged on this really fascinating intersection of old-school detective work, cutting-edge digital forensics, and genetic genealogy. We're going to methodically break down the chilling timeline of that night and look at the high-tech investigation that finally brought a killer to justice. Let's get into it.
Here's a quick look at our agenda for today. We'll start with the night of November 13th, then move to the survivors' chilling accounts, how police tracked the suspect vehicle, the DNA and digital forensics involved, and finally, the arrest and resolution.
All right, part 1. The night of November 13th and what investigators call a 16-minute window of terror.
So, tracking the victim's final movements shows us that everyone was safely home after what looked like a completely typical college Saturday night out. Ethan Chapin and Zana Kernodle got back from an on-campus fraternity party around 1:45 a.m. Just a few minutes later, at 1:56 a.m., Madison Mogan and Kaylee Goncalves were dropped off by a private driver after hitting up a local sports bar and a food truck. By 2 a.m., everybody was inside. But what's absolutely crucial here is that some of them were still awake much later. At 4 a.m., Zana actually received a DoorDash delivery, and digital records even show she was scrolling TikTok at 4:12 a.m. They were secure in their home, completely unaware of what was about to happen.
And this brings us to a terrifyingly tight 16-minute window between 4:04 and 4:20 a.m. Based on neighborhood surveillance and those unsealed affidavits, a white vehicle entered the area at exactly 4:04 a.m. Get this, it was the 4th time this car had slowly passed by the house that morning. Then, at 4:17 a.m., a security camera less than 50 feet away picked up some really distorted audio. Voices, a whimper, a loud thud, and a dog barking. Just 3 minutes after that, at 4:20 a.m., that same white vehicle is caught on camera speeding away from the neighborhood. Within that incredibly brief window, all 4 brutal murders took place.
Moving on to Section 2, the survivors' chilling accounts from inside that King Road residence.
Now, down on the 2nd floor, surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen woke up around 4 a.m. At first, she thought she heard Kaylee playing with her dog up on the 3rd floor. But a short time later, she heard what she thought was one of her roommates saying, "There's someone here." Now, investigators later pointed out this actually could have been Xana, since we know she was awake getting her DoorDash order. Mortensen peeked out her door but didn't see anything. So she went back to her room, but just moments later, she heard crying coming from Xana's room. She opened her door again, and this time, she heard an unfamiliar male voice say these deeply unsettling words, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Hearing that, Mortensen opened her door for a 3rd time, and in a moment of sheer terror, a moment that really became the linchpin of the whole investigation, she gave this precise physical description of an intruder who walked right past her toward the sliding glass door. She described a man clad in black clothing, wearing a mask over his mouth and nose. She noted he was 5'10" or taller, athletically built, and specifically mentioned he had very bushy eyebrows. Faced with this unimaginable sight, Mortensen stated she entered a frozen shock phase. Literally paralyzed by fear, she locked herself inside her room. And this shock-induced delay, mixed with the utter confusion of that night, actually explains why the 911 call wasn't placed until 11:58 a.m. the following morning, where it was initially just reported as an unconscious person.
That brings us to Section 3, tracking the suspect vehicle and following the trail of that white Elantra.
These fundamental steps really show how police built their case from the ground up. First, forensic examiners identified that blurry car circling the neighborhood as the 2011 to 2016 white Hyundai Elantra. They blasted this alert out to neighboring jurisdictions, which importantly included Washington State University in Pullman, just 8 miles over the border. WSU campus police quickly found a 2015 Elantra registered to a guy named Brian Koberger, a 28-year-old PhD student in criminology. And when investigators pulled his driver's license photo, his physical features, specifically those bushy eyebrows, were a perfect match for the harrowing description provided by the surviving roommate.
Then, cell phone data revealed this chilling pattern of intentional movement.
investigators got a warrant for Kohberger's phone records. Check this out. At 2:47 a.m., his phone was active in Pullman, heading east toward Moscow. But then, from 2:54 a.m. all the way to 4:48 a.m., the phone completely disconnected from the network. This deliberate cellular blackout perfectly overlaps the exact time of the murders. It strongly suggests premeditation and, frankly, a pretty clear knowledge of how digital tracking works. The phone finally reconnected at 4:48 a.m., way south of Moscow, making its way back toward Pullman.
All right, Section 4, DNA and digital forensics, the real science of catching a killer.
So how exactly did a trash can in Pennsylvania solve a murder in Idaho? Well, this is where investigative genetic genealogy comes into play. Back at the crime scene, police found a tan leather Ka-Bar knife sheath left right on the bed next to Madison Mogen. They managed to extract just trace amounts of male DNA from the button snap of that sheath. Now, there was no match in the national database, so the FBI built family trees using commercial DNA databases, and that pointed them straight to a family over in Pennsylvania. Agents actually surveilled Kohberger's parents' home across the country during winter break and stealthily grabbed a DNA sample right out of their garbage.
And the results? Totally undeniable. The familial DNA extracted from that Pennsylvania trash pull was a 99.98% probability match to the biological father of whoever left their DNA on that knife sheath back in Idaho. I mean, that level of statistical certainty gave law enforcement exactly the probable cause they needed to finally make their move. But let's jump over to the digital realm, because it builds a really disturbing psychological profile. Digital forensics experts from the SANS Institute dug into Kohberger's devices. He tried to cover his tracks using VPNs and incognito mode. You know, tactics a lot of people think make them completely invisible. Spoiler alert, they don't. System autofill databases preserve some incredibly chilling search terms tied to violent fantasies. He had actually downloaded detailed profiles on over 20 different serial killers. And in the days right after the murders, his devices showed this frantic online surveillance, like constantly searching for lists of registered elantras and compulsively checking police press releases.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Arrest and Final Resolution, Justice for the Victims. After years of intense legal maneuvering, the case actually reached a really sudden conclusion. In July 2025, just weeks before his trial was scheduled to kick off, Kohberger pleaded guilty to all charges to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for the burglary charge. On top of that, he was ordered to pay $270,000 in fines and restitution. By giving up his right to appeal, it's guaranteed he'll spend the absolute rest of his life behind bars. While the legal proceedings are officially over, the Moscow community is obviously still healing. That King Roadhouse, which was such a grim reminder of the tragedy, has been demolished. But in its place, the memories of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin really do live on. The university awarded them posthumous degrees, established scholarships in their names, and opened the Vandal Healing Garden, a beautiful, dedicated space on campus to remember 4 bright lives that were so tragically cut short. So as this explainer clearly shows, the intersection of genetic genealogy, cell phone tracking, and modern digital forensics creates a remarkably tight net around today's investigations. Here, we had an intruder who tried to vanish into the night, covering his face and trying his best to erase his digital trail. And yet, from a microscopic trace of DNA on a metal button snap to a deleted search history buried in an autofill cache, escaping justice proved absolutely impossible. It really leaves us with a profound question to think about. With today's technology, is the era of the untraceable criminal officially over? Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep seeking the facts.